issue of reimbursement is really fundamental. Fundamental to the people who lose money, real money, and it's also fundamental to the incentives for your institutions to do better, because if you're reimbursing, then you have a financial incentive to impose stronger measures. Aside from just those panels that the ranking member mentioned that say, be sure you're paying someone you know, they create the kinds of incentives that enable and empower you to do more of the friction, slowing down people, actually, so they're not just breezing through a transaction. So I was, quite honestly, shocked by the statement made by that J.P. Morgan Chase representative this morning that we were ignoring the underlying problem in our report. I was shocked somewhat because, as it happens, Chase has the lowest reimbursement rate for scams of any of the three banks that we investigate. In fact, Chase reimbursed 2% or less of all scams disputed each year for the last 5 years. In 2022, you reimbursed 1% of all scam disputes. In 2021, Chase reimbursed 0.09%. In 2020, this figure was 0.01%. You must have amazing investigators, Ms. Felcher. What's your explanation for those numbers?
We reimburse the qualifying...
Could you move the microphone
closer
to you?
Sorry. Yes. We reimburse the qualifying imposter scams in accordance with the network policy. We know that the vast majority of these scams are originating upstream from when the customer actually goes onto the Chase app or chase.com to perform the Zelle transaction. Nearly 60% of the Zelle scams that we hear about from our customers are originating on social media platforms. We also know that criminals are spoofing the telephone numbers of trusted institutions like their banks, like the utility companies.
But essentially, all of these claims were made by people who authorized the transfer of money? Is that what Chase believes? Because we're talking about less than 2%.
We reimburse the scams that qualified for the imposter scams, and we do not reimburse for authorized scams, for example, for those with their customers that are purchasing.
You do the absolute minimum required by law.
We actually go above and beyond the law in terms of our reimbursement for qualifying imposter scams.
Well, the numbers don't show it, do they?
I would respectfully disagree that we actually do go above and beyond what is required by law in reimbursing certain imposter scams.
Mr. Fowler, as of June, there's a new policy that certain kinds of authorized transfers be reimbursed, correct?
Chairman, that's correct.
What is that policy now?
The policy makes a distinction within the category of scams, which is what we're talking about right now, which is the authorized transaction. And it says when there are circumstances where an imposter specifically linked to a financial institution, a government organization, or known service provider is the instigator, then the Zelle rule, which is distinct from Regulation E, as you know, which doesn't require authorized transactions to be reimbursed, the Zelle rule, which goes above and beyond, it's those circumstances where there's an imposter that the Zelle rule says reimbursement.
In those narrow circumstances. Are the banks complying with that rule?
Chairman, I would challenge your first point. It isn't narrow. There are many, including regulators, who say that these are the most insidious and increasingly common. 95% of these types of scams are happening outside of the payments rails, outside of Zelle. So that's a separate topic, which is an important one. But of the 5% that are happening here, these are common. And in defense of my colleagues here, my explanation of the numbers that you read earlier were these are newer phenoms over the last few years. There hasn't been a regulation that required repayment, and as policies, procedures, technologies, and capabilities within the member organizations of the financial institutions within Zelle and within Zelle itself have improved, and the rules have come in place, the financial institutions within the Zelle network, the 2,100, of whom 95% are small banks, credit unions, et cetera, are living up to the expectations of the Zelle rule.
And where they're not, the percentages that I've used, though, apply to the 3 banks here, and you didn't dispute those numbers.
Senator, I don't recognize those numbers.
Have you used any kind of third-party review of your practices here? Any of the banks? Third-party review, some independent review of how you investigate and deny reimbursement? Ms. Felcher?
We take our responsibility to investigate every single claim incredibly seriously, and we're always ensuring that the quality of those decisions are high.
So you've never had a third-party review. Mr. Monaco?
Mr. Chairman, I am not aware of a third-party review. I can look into that and see if there, in fact, has been one. But I would make one other comment here, which is that when a claim is denied, right, and a customer at Bank of America requests a re-review, we do that. We have another investigator do it, so a separate one, and customers can do that multiple times. So we do think that each circumstance is different, each circumstance is unique, and we investigate each one fully before making a decision.
Mr. Vancini, I gather the answer is no third-party review. Mr. Vancini?
I'm not aware of any third-party review outside of the construct of external audit.
Senator Johnson.
So again, I'm just trying to clarify things. So I want to compare